Well, and one other thing that I want to mention, and that is the colonel gets the blame for this. He got the blame because in the early 1980s, when this judge looked at the estate, he blamed Colonel Parker for Elvis taking the RCA deal that bought him out for $5.4 million so that he could use that money to pay up Priscilla in the divorce. Colonel always gets blamed for that. He tried to talk Elvis out of that. He said, Elvis, that's your annuity. And he was right. I mean, there's all sorts of royalties. There's the royalty from radio play. There's royalty from television. There's royalty from record sales. And so those royalties, I believe those RCA royalties were bringing him in like $1 million a year.
Yeah.
And that would have continued on. But he wanted to pay off Priscilla in that divorce and get it done with. And so not only was Colonel Parker, he didn't want to do it, and what what Elvis told him was, I'll get Ed Hookstratton, the other attorney. If you don't want to do it, I'll get Ed Hookstratton or someone else to do it. So then Colonel Parker said, well, then I might as well overlook it and oversee it.
And in this book, guys, you're going to see how Colonel was trying to talk sense into Elvis about that. And as Greg just mentioned, it goes and bites Colonel in the butts at the end. And that's why they use that to kind of make it look like the Colonel, had taken all this money from Elvis, which that is not a accurate, reality of the story. And
let me interrupt you here. Let me just explain to the audience there were basically 4 or 5 different pots of money so that they understand what kind of percentage the Colonel took. So there was movie money, which he took 25% of.
Okay.
Record money, merchandising money, and anything that, so those are all 25%. Anything that Elvis didn't have to wake up and perform, Colonel got 50% of. Okay. The other 50% came from the touring, but the Colonel had to employ a team of people to do the tours because the tours were heavy. And before they even split the 50%, all the expenses that Elvis had incurred were written off. So that came right off the top. So after Colonel got his quote unquote 50%, there wasn't much left. So it was Elvis's favor.
That's what I'm saying, Marshall. Elvis got his money. Elvis Presley got his 50%. Colonel had to pay for all the expenses to produce the concerts. Correct? Right. Is that correct, Marshall?
That's correct. Now RCA would also
my guy and I tell everyone.
Yeah, and RCA would pay, I think, $50,000 a show in advertising cost. But yeah, that and Greg says, and Greg's, by the way, has worked with some of the biggest concert promoters, Irving Azoff, a lot of big guys, and they've all said, I would not take that deal. Not only would they not take that deal, but they wouldn't take the option of exclusivity. So when he did get his 25%, most managers get 15%, but you have to remember Colonel was not only his manager, he was his promoter, he was his lawyer, because he did all the contracts. He was his PR person, So he had like 4 or 5 different jobs that he did.
And Colonel's only working for Elvis. Elvis was trying to get him to sign Elvis's girlfriend. What's his name? The actress. Anne Margaret. Yeah. Colonel, he wanted, I guess Anne Margaret had talked to Elvis into talking to the Colonel, and the Colonel was like, all right, my boy, I'll do that. But you just got to know one thing. If I do this, I'm going to have to give her the same amount of time that I give you. So you just let me know if that's going to be all right with you, Elvis, and I'll give Anne Margaret, 50% of my time, and I'll give you the other 50%. Elvis thought about it pretty quickly and said, nah, yeah, you're right about that, Colonel. I love that. I love that, Marshall. Like, yeah, Anne, you got to go find somebody else. But so what I'm getting to is Colonel only worked for Elvis. Elvis had Colonel all by himself. I mean, so 100% of Colonel's time, as Greg explains how his work schedule was pretty much all day and night was for Elvis Presley, right?
And never took a vacation, because he explained to Greg, why would I have to go? Why would I want to go on vacation? This is what I love doing. I mean,
Yeah,
he lived for promoting Elvis Presley.
yeah. And
You want to be like that in your corner. Trust me.
I don't want to give this part away because they have to go read this book for this story. But there is a story where Elvis, not Elvis, but Colonel and Greg are out in a Colonel backyard, and Greg witnesses Colonel cry. No one has ever heard Colonel and crying probably ever in the same sentence. I'm not going to tell anything more about that because it's a really it's a really sad and really important part of this Elvis and Colonel story that I think every Elvis fan needs to know about it. And that it just comes from Greg. It was only Greg there with Colonel when this story happened. And I believe when you read and learn what I'm talking about, you're gonna question everything you've thought about with Colonel Parker there at the end of Elvis's life.
Well, and one other thing, while all this was going on, I think the last decade of his first wife's life, Marie,
yeah,
he was bedridden. He in addition to promoting and taking care of Elvis, he was taking care of her. Can you imagine the heartbreak watching the love of your life just kind of dissolve in front of your eyes?
It seems like Colonel was faithful to her even during these
Absolutely.
times.
Absolutely.
And he was all by himself. It looks like he was by himself in California and Vegas a lot of this times, and then coming back as much as he could. And I think y'all talked about that. He had I guess 24-hour service.
Yeah, she had the best available 24/7 service in terms of caretakers.
What was wrong with her?
Yeah, I think she had a brain tumor. I think that's what it was, but I had to go back and refer to the book. But I think it all had to do with that, and just for the last 10 years of her life, she just spiraled, and it was not a slow death. And so, can you imagine the heartbreak that he must have been going through, but never showed it to anybody and made sure that she was taken care of?
Yeah. Wow. And Greg talks about he would be over. Colonel liked to cook and have barbecues, right? At his house there in Palm Springs.
I never asked Greg this, but he cooked this thing called the hobo stew, and it sounded so gross I didn't even want to ask what it was. But those old carnival days still stuck with him.